authority. And the point is, majority of the committee member is the elected fisherman. In addition, detailed rules are autonomously set by the Fisheries Cooperative Association within the organizations, according to the local conditions in terms of social and ecological characteristics of that area. So the point is, in the Japanese system, the fundamental concept is resource management by the resource users themselves. Right. So, local fishers are engaged not only in fisheries operations, but also in resource management as a part of existing conservation. The core member of the local fishers organizations are attending about 15 meetings, 15 meetings every month in order to make local rules. Of course, it sacrifices their operation time and their income, but this is a part of their duty, right? They have fishing rights, and rights always come with duty, so the duty is to make the local rule and implement it at the local level. So this system is seen from the so-called Western viewpoint. Local fishers are playing a part of public roles, which should be done by the government. So in the Western world, it is called co-management. But in Japan, we don't call it co-management. Fisheries management, resource management is a part of fishers' role. Okay? Okay, let me move to the MPAs. We have various types of MPAs, and broadly speaking, we can divide it into two parts. The first one is the upper part, legal MPAs. MPAs set based on some legal basis. The another one is the lower part, autonomous MPAs. Areas which are protected by local resource users themselves. So now I'm going to introduce 3 typical examples from the autonomous MPAs. Well, this is the map of Japan, and ecologically speaking, Japanese coastal areas are spreading from the subarctic area to the pure tropical area. So we have a variety of ecosystems. The first example comes from the subarctic area, where it is called Shiretoko Peninsula, which was listed in the World Natural Heritage in 2005. And in this area, the main industry is fisheries and tourism. About 40% of local people work for fisheries industry, so the main industry is fisheries. In this peninsula, the walleye pollock is the most important species. And the local fishers set autonomous MPAs based on their local rules in order to protect the spawning stock. But please note that MPA is just one of many management measures introduced there. So MPA alone is not enough. In addition to that, the local people introduced seasonal limits, operation time limits, number of nets, mesh size, total allowable count, and so on and so on. But MPA is, of course, one of very important tools. This MPA is introduced by fishers in order to protect fisheries resources. Second example is the southern part of Japan, from tropical area. In this case, MPA was introduced to protect coral reef. Local fishers organization and scuba association, divers, and prefectural research stations cooperate to set autonomous MPAs for coral reef protection. The knowledge of local fishers are utilized in the designing process of MPAs. Okay? And in this case, not only fisheries sectors, but also the diving, the tourism sectors are cooperating together. The final case is from Tokyo, a very urbanized area. In this area, only 500 meters of natural coast is left out of 140 kilometers of coastline. No, only 0.3% of the natural coast. So, MPA was introduced to recover the seagrass bed in the coastal line. Local fishers, environmental NGOs, scuba divers, local people, and elementary schools are working together for restoring seagrass bed. So, in this case, wide-ranging stakeholders work together to protect the bundle of ecosystem services, including fisheries resources. Again, in this case, local fishers' knowledge, traditional knowledge, is the very base of the designing process. This drawing shows exactly the same area of the Tokyo Bay about 200-300 years ago. You can find fisheries operations here, people are living here, seaweed aquaculture here. So, unless the objective of MPA or ecosystem conservation is go back to the original wilderness of hundreds of or thousands of years ago, local fisheries is not something to be eliminated from the ecosystem. But fisheries is indispensable part of local ecosystem. This is our understanding. And actually, local fishers are playing a core role in designing and implementing MPAs. Okay, this is the final slide. Okay, lessons. All local users of ecosystem services, including fishers and scientists and government officers, can cooperate together for targets 6 and 11. A wide variety of MPAs could be established autonomously, not only legally, but autonomously, to match the particular local, social, ecological conditions and objectives and issues to be tackled in each area. This very much fits to the CBD ecosystem approach principle 2. Management should be decentralized to the lowest appropriate level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Makina-san. Our last presentation is, now we went down, now we're going to the west, east, anyway, the open oceans of Vanuatu. So our presenter is Francis Hickey. He's the coordinator for Traditional Resource Management Program for the Vanuatu Cultural Center.
Thank you. And a lot of area covered in a short period of time. So I'd like to just give you the whole thing in a nutshell. And then it's basically our premise is that if you're in an area where there's a strong tradition of customary tenure, traditional knowledge, traditional governance, and a system of tapu, then basically an MPA really, it's already there. Basically, that's what I'm going to try and show here. If I start losing the point, please bring me back to it. I'd also like to acknowledge my brothers from Melanesia in the back there. Papua New Guinea, a chief from Vanuatu, from the island I'm living on, so I have to be very careful what I say. So this is just an example of a tapu. where in a village where any man, woman, or child dies, this area will be shut for maybe 2 years or so. And that's done by the chief, and basically with that leaf there, that leaf represents the ancestors, if you will, and they're watching. So it's quite well respected until today. So Vanuatu, where are we? Between Fiji and Solomons there, everyone see it? And then there's the inset of an archipelago about 1,000 kilometers long, about 80 islands. Stuck on that one. Okay, so just a bit of background. About 120 different social linguistic groups spread over 250,000 people. Actually the highest cultural diversity in the world per capita. Independent in 1980, and land was the driving force behind getting the land back from the colonials. France and England. Known as the condominium, but, or called the condominium, but known as the pandemonium. So at that time, land and marine tenure were embedded in the Constitution. And we like to say that the ancestors were like natural scientists. They did research on their environment and encoded the traditional knowledge of environmental management in their oral histories. So there's a rich heritage of traditional governance in communities, basically a chief, a council of elders, and they regulate activities in the village. And then through custom tenure, basically they regulate activities and access on their fishing grounds, as well as on their land. There's a rich corpus of traditional knowledge associated with the environment and resources. You pretty well need that if you're going to live on an island and it's accustomed to all sorts of environmental shocks, quite a sensitive environment, so basically you have to study your environment very well if you wish to survive. Tradition remains a central theme in most people's lives. In near rural areas, they speak their own language, their vernacular tongue. The chief and the elders regulate most activities. Much of it prescribed by customary rules and such, since a long time. And basically, what we like to call the traditional economy. Growing your own food, catching your own fish, spending a lot of time with your family, celebrating various customs that strengthen social bonds and produce trade relationships and kinship relationships, strengthening those, and that's part of your whole social currency. 80% of the population are rural, but also people in the urban area are part of the system. So the TRM, or Traditional Resource Management Strategies, are a central part of the cultural norm, and it includes traditional fishing practices, because inherent in that is the sustainability. And this is just an example of people fishing with a small net, which they weave from local fibers, and one group places themselves on an area where they know that the fish are going to run when the other team comes and hits the water, and the fish all shoot for the little ravine, the raceway, and they're caught in the net, picked up, and they can be selected. Which ones are good to eat, which ones might be toxic, which ones are in season, so to speak, that is full of grease, and these sorts of things. So it's selected, basically. Women and children are the best reef cleaners, generally. So they wait for the low tide, they go down, just got little butter knives there, they're finding clams in the sand. They can identify where an octopus lair is and access that, crabs, fish in the pools, and so they supply a lot of food for household security. Another selective method, get a few mullet, and that's the catch for the day. And the kids grow up young and early to access the food resources. So basically, every time you go to the sea to catch fish, you're monitoring. How much time did it take you last week or last year to catch in the same spot, and how much now? So the kids grow up with a lot of knowledge of their environment just by practicing really well from their youth. So some resource management strategies include sacred sites, regular area, species, and seasonal closures, gear and access restrictions through the customary marine tenure system, behavior and cultural prohibitions, what totem you're from, you don't eat certain foods, that sort of thing. There are traditional calendars. There's a lot of customary rules that separate agricultural practices from fishing practices. For a good example is when you plant your yam in about September, so about 6 months later in March, you don't access the nearshore reefs. And that's the warm season when they're spawning. Most of the animals on the reef are actually reproducing. So it's excellent. For 6 months of the year, you just leave them. Leave them alone, and you go outside for the flying fish, the tunas, the other deep water fish, and you concentrate on your agriculture that time, the yam, the taro. There's a lot more examples like that, and basically it's a holistic system, monitored and enforced by the communities and the ancestors, as I mentioned, and it's very diverse and flexible in contrast to the NPA model. Other positive aspects, it's associated with an equitable distribution of benefits. It's not going to work if everyone doesn't get a piece of the pie. And so that's the way it works. Reinforces traditional governance systems, that is the chief and the elders. Doesn't require much technical or outside support. It's a living tradition. And people are so familiar with it that it's basically, everyone knows the rules. It's very decentralized, right to the community level. I acknowledge my Japanese colleague's last comment that it's in line with the CBD, to decentralize to the lowest possible level. We find it more effective than protected areas, and we'll come back to that. People can basically manage the taboo themselves within their own capacity. We find it much more sustainable. Even the term NPA confuses people. I remember asking an older gentleman on the island that was on a workshop, NPAs. I said, "What does NPA stand for?" And he says, Melanesian People's Association. And there he was at the workshop. So it's a bit of a foreign thing, and so that's one of the issues with it. So just to recap, it's a living tradition of resource management, and it's kind of custom and customary marine tenure. Post-season species, areas, gears, restriction, size limit, restricted access, as we mentioned. Basically, all the strategies we find in the West, we find them already in Oceania. And they've all predating them. So it's rooted into the cultural norm and strengthens governance systems. Flexible system that takes into account socio-cultural, economic, and security links. Doesn't necessarily take the Western model of locking up resources for biodiversity protection ideals, but promotes, and this is key here, an overall balance of sustainable resources. Is that better? We can discuss that. Also, what we see is that the NPA target, moving into the second sort of half of what we're trying to look at here, what we find is that a lot of the NPA projects, they come with this preconception that it's going to be science-based. And we've already sort of documented that the Pacific has its own sort of science, its own traditional knowledge base. So scientists don't really want to know so much about that, but they want to know more about the science base, what they have to offer. So it's a bit prescriptive. And what we find too is that it creates a somewhat lopsided relationship with the communities. The donors control the access to the money, the technical expertise. They speak in scientific jargon that no one understands. So they sort of put themselves up on a pedestal, if you will. And they prefer to institutionalize a very fluid and dynamic system, which is a bit of an issue. And often communities will acquiesce to the donors to access the support. It's hard to say no to all that, all the opportunities and the money and such. Diving gear, boats. So that gentleman there that was standing there with his leaves, sort of a bouquet of leaves, he'd acquired the traditional rights to all of those leaves through various ceremonies. And each leaf has a name and a particular translation. And he sets that bouquet on two ends of the beach where he puts his tablet. And in his talk, his words, he says, it's in our blood. So I just wanted to point out that this is a quote from the Article 11. And the part that's in the bold there, where commitments that can be measured, evaluated, and enhanced over time. So we ask ourselves, is it, and it says that it's, so I have to go back up here, tried and tested approach, applied for centuries to ensure most diverse and adaptable management institutional arrangements. where commitments can be measured, evaluated, and enhanced. But isn't that diverse, the NPA? Like my Japanese colleague said, NPA is not enough. Really, we see it as a single problem, unidimensional, and the protected areas are primarily being promoted as they're quantifiable. They're easy for administration purposes. They're convenient for the donor, so they can calculate an area and put it on a map, say this is what we've got managed. But that's really quantitative. It's not very it's quantitative, but it doesn't talk about quality. The point is that biodiversity change is managed other ways, can be easily monitored or measured through CPUE studies, sketch gradient effort, or resource surveys before and after. There's also something called dataless management, which is very effective using cooperative management techniques that my Japanese colleague also touched upon, where you feed in scientific knowledge to fill in gaps in traditional knowledge. And then you combine it with the traditional knowledge, and then stand back and let the community decide how they want to go with it. You combine the two. And they make the final decision. But most projects, they sort of come with the preoccupied or the preconceived notion that it's going to be a protected area. And we're going to get this area here and that sort of thing. So there's a bit of a contrast there.